Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Sasha Peterson. I'm the Managing Director of the American Society of Adaptation Professionals. Thank you for joining us in what proves to be should be a very exciting webinar on the Carbon Disclosure Project's City Data and Adaptation Strategies, which Katie Walsh has graciously offered to present for this ASAP webinar, and it's the next in a long line of successful webinars for ASAP members, so we're glad that you could join us. For today, I'll give a brief overview of where we are with ASAP, then we'll turn to the webinar itself. Following that, we will have discussion, plenty of time for questions and discussion after the webinar. So just a quick background on ASAP. You are all probably members. We are growing over the course of this year. We now have over 600 members nationally, partially due to a series of regional climate conferences that ASAP has been supporting across the country, most recently in the Pacific Northwest 2 weeks ago. So about 35% of those 600 people are government, local, state, federal, and tribal government. 30% are nonprofit. 20% are affiliated with academic institutions, and about 15% are from the private sector. And this initial phase, getting ASAP off the ground and started, really depends on your participation in it so that we can be a truly member-driven organization, and then also on our sponsorship from the MacArthur Foundation and the Kresge Foundation, which allows there to be no member dues during this startup phase. You can see here's a map of some of our ASAP members spread across the country, and we're starting to fill that map in. So if your pin or your dot for your location is not on that map, please take a moment after the webinar to go to adaptationprofessionals.org and click Join Us, and you can register there. It really only takes a couple of minutes, and you can make sure, in addition to the newsletters, that you get access to the website and all the capabilities of the website, and the webinars will be posted there as well after they're completed. I also just wanted to give you a quick update on a couple of things that are on the horizon. If you happen to be in Southeast Florida, the Southeast Florida Regional Climate Leadership Summit is happening at the beginning of October. ASAP is sponsoring that event, so check out our booth there, swing by and say hello and meet your other ASAP members. Also, just released yesterday was the call for proposals for the National Adaptation Forum. The proposals are due October 24th, and you can get information at nationaladaptationforum.org/call-proposals. Up there, the forum itself is not happening until May of 2015, but if you've been working on great adaptation things and want to have a forum to share that information, this would be a great place to do that. All right, without further ado, I wanted to welcome Katie Walsh, and she's going to be hosting today's webinar. You can see there's her ASAP member profile information, so you can connect with her either with the contact information we'll provide later or through ASAP directly. A little background on Katie. Katie is the cities manager for the North America for the Carbon Disclosure Project, or CDP. CDP is an international not-for-profit organization providing the only global system for companies and cities to measure, disclose, manage, and share vital environmental information. As the city's manager, she works with municipalities in the U.S. and Canada to report on their greenhouse gas emissions, mitigation strategies, climate risks and vulnerabilities, and adaptation and resilience planning efforts. Prior to joining CDP, she served as an Environmental Defense Fund Climate Corps Fellow with the City of Philadelphia's Mayor's Office of Sustainability, focused on supporting the city's climate adaptation planning efforts. She also previously served as a fellow with Climate CoLab, a project of the MIT Center for Collective Intelligence, where she managed the Urban Adaptation Contest. Katie has a master's degree in urban environmental planning from Tufts University and a master's in international law and diplomacy from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. And there's her contact information. I'm going to hand it over to her, and she will take away the second part of our webinar.
Great. Great. Okay. So thanks everyone. Thanks Sasha for hosting this. I have taken advantage myself and benefited from ASAP's webinars, so I'm very happy to have this opportunity to participate. I wanted to take a quick second to just direct you to the website here, just our open data platform. So if you didn't have a chance to follow the link in advance, you can go here, and if you can multitask with the two windows open, you can just go ahead to the opendata.cdp.net, which I'm going to end up referring to at the end and just kind of indicate what what it is that we have and what's there, and if it's something that you can go in and plug in and use. So really wanted to acknowledge this. Sorry if there's any background noise. This great opportunity to talk about the CDP Cities report and our open data, but really see this webinar as an opportunity to learn from all of you on the call. We produce these reports each year with the output from the disclosure of all the participating cities to CDP Cities. We really benefit from being asked challenging questions, of the data and the analysis to really make sure that we're pushing the envelope and producing high quality insights from the disclosure, which will benefit cities and benefit the community. So really look forward to this discussion. So before I talk a little bit more about my kind of goals for the presentation, context of CDP and what CDP is. So we are, formerly known as Carbon Disclosure Project. We're an NGO that was started in 2000 in the UK with offices all over the world. So I'm based in New York City. And the engine behind what we do is an annual information request to companies and their supply chains and city governments and soon to be states and regions to publicly disclose on their climate activities, carbon emissions, mitigation strategies, and for companies we're looking at water, forests, and natural resource use, as well as climate risks and adaptation strategies, and that straddles both company request and city request. And so the CDP theory of change is that through measurement there will be better management, and then through the standardized benchmarking and comparability of industry peers and cities, you're identifying better practice that can be realized and really pushing and having more ambitious targets set. So to this end, we are supporting companies and cities in the annual disclosure process. We write reports, produce analysis and insights from the responses, and we're creating leadership indices for the companies and organizing our share of workshops. And we're also producing benchmarking data, analytics, and tools. So this is just a snapshot of a benchmark tool that launched last year with the data that we received from cities from 2013. And this is something that cities get themselves after they report. They can compare themselves to others and kind of plug and play based on different data points. So, ultimately our goal from the disclosure data and the insights that are being generated from companies and cities in turn informs how investors and corporations and governments, making policy and business decisions are making those decisions and really reflecting the underlying risks and costs from inaction on climate change, and really then the opportunities from. So our information request is endorsed by institutional investors with 92 trillion assets and under management, names from the financial and investment and pension and insurance community, and really the transparency of this data ensures that the financial community also has access are reporting, through the CDP platform. And in 2014, and the subject of today's webinar, we have had 207 global cities. So to speak to my, goals in today's webinar is to first, speak to what we found in our cities data, and I'm actually encompassing context from 2013 findings because those are if you downloaded the open data, that's actually the source data is what is available to you from the open data platform, and then also speak to the 2014 findings as well from the disclosure process. And then, the second kind of goal then is just to indicate, what you have available to you to, explain and how and why it was gathered into context, so when you look at it, you understand what it is. And my takeaway, I hope, for you is that I've done a decent enough job explaining what's there, kind of excite you to explore it, and know that you have an open invitation to use the city's data, think of ways that we might be able to collect even better quality data from cities and, serve them in return, and then characterize this so that we can think about, really in the adaptation and risk space, really identifying the risks and solutions for cities as they work through this. So the context for CDP, since 2011, which is when we started the city's data collection, we've been inviting cities to report, regardless of size or geographic location, to disclose. This is just a spread of this last 2014 cycle of all the cities that reported. And CDP has this great partnership with the C40 network, which I'm sure everybody on this call knows, but C40 is a network of the world's mega cities that are taking action on reducing emissions, and C40 cities are reporting through the CDP annual process, and we gain a lot from our engagement with them and the thought leadership that comes from the team at C40 and through the city's engagement. So while we cities reporting the world's mega cities, there's also a lot of diversity in who reports through CDP. So here's a snapshot of where you can see in 24 block of cities, but then also sort of the smaller, as we define it, sort of the 600K and below size cities. So there really is kind of a diverse spread. So as I talk about the report and the insights, you can kind of keep in mind who and what context we're talking about with what's coming in. So now to cover what's actually in the disclosure process, what are we looking at? The information request since 2011 has developed over the years. We do seek to keep the requests more or less consistent, so in the climate space, so that we're able to track data and the lift for cities is not too burdensome. We have about 40 to 45 questions that cover the following areas. So we're looking at governance. We're asking questions in risks and adaptation, which is the focus of the rest of the content. We've asked about opportunities from climate change. We ask about their emissions measurement and management, whether that's in local government and or community. And then we also ask about the decisions that they're making. And so, to explain this, I mean, they were informed by the 10 years plus that we have with company data, but also really refined with the specifics of feedback from cities year to year. So this is just an example of a city that's responding. They come in, they kind of log in and use an online response system, but then an example of a type of question that we ask for them to list and describe effects, and timescales. This is sort of the flavor of what the questions are, but there's a full guidance document, so if you're in the open data and trying to understand how a city answers, go back to that to look at it. There is just pass on. So really now to take this opportunity to see, okay, well, what is it that we found in this process to understand, what cities are. I'll turn to, thinking about our 2013 report and from the healthier, wealthier cities, and then I'll kind of flip very quickly and talk about 2014 with protecting our capital. And both of these are on the website, so I encourage you to kind of dig in if you can. So if I go here, so there was kind of several different things that we found, but I thought of interest to this group is really of the 110 cities that were reporting in 2013. What some of the big findings. So it's probably not a surprise to those listening, but really the diversity of methodologies that cities are using when asked about how are they identifying their risks from climate change. And so, going through this process, you can see the diversity here of what's available, and that there's really not a clear path. And I know that there's many that are trying to address this, but really, going through the disclosure process, really, and having this output, is you can see the need to strengthen and really identify that there's an opportunity here to maybe provide some more consistency and guidance. So the next graphic of the 110, we're trying to understand what it is that what are the climate risks that cities say that they're facing, and across the board, heat waves and temperature increase kind of factor up, most significantly, and then rainfall. And what we then looked at is, trying to see regionally with those reporting sort of how this breaks down. So there's definitely some probably natural trends that break and how this is represented, but this is sort of an attempt to take the data and represent it in a way that is useful and compelling to someone kind of coming in and reviewing it. So the next question is to find out, what are the steps and what are the actions that cities are taking. And so, of the 80% of cities that are saying that they're finding temperature increase and heat waves as a real challenge, what are the actions that bubble up in across those cities? So there's several of these slides. I won't be able to reference each and every one of them in the interest of time, but they are available to go through and see. But so you can see here for the number of actions with heat waves that really tree planting and creation of green space kind of leveled up pretty highly. The next was around those questions of rainfall. So 74% of cities are seeing that rainfall is a concern, and the majority of action is happening in stormwater capture systems. The same for drought. So is the current action, and of course all of this begs again too is saying the interventions, are these the appropriate interventions to kind of match the scale of the necessity and urgency of the challenge, but across for the self-reported actions that are happening, this is what cities that report through CDP are telling us that they're doing. And the same for floods. With 40%, you're seeing that crisis management programs with warning and evacuation is kind of what is one of the main key responders, response systems. And I'll just go through. So we now are thinking about, with 2014 data, we wanted to, we have a surge of cities with 80% increase. So we had 207 cities that reported in 2014, and kind of motivated by the Risky Business Report that came out in the U.S. and really this question of the costs of inaction and risks, and then the question too with bubbling up on resiliency and how are cities preparing themselves and what steps taking, and how is business going to be impacted. And so we wanted to do something a little bit different. So we produced this report on protecting our capital, where we're looking at how climate adaptation in cities is creating a resilient place for business. But the way that we did it, in addition to our information requests in asking cities what effects they saw, we also then layered in the data that we collect from our companies. And so we looked for intersections where companies have identified cities specifically when talking about climate change risks, and then mapped it to those cities themselves, what it is that they were doing. So the first part of this is, just at large in the information request in asking cities in 2014, the 207, what are they seeing? Similar to the 2013, we're seeing trends where the majority of cities are saying, it's temperature increase in heat waves and rainfall. So now kind of from year to year, we're seeing, some of that consistency. And then when we're asking the question, well, what are the impacts on businesses, in cities around, climate change? This kind of demonstrates the more like qualitative pieces that we have. But Jakarta, Indonesia is telling us that the different development sectors are threatened by climate change: energy, agriculture, fisheries, infrastructure, health, and how all these sectors will fail unless climate change is anticipated and responded to properly. So, that's really the lifeblood of the city of Jakarta, that they're saying that the whole city and business will be impacted. And similarly in San Francisco, if the built environment is not adapted to allow for these changes, then business will face disruption. So across the board, of this question, how will business be impacted by climate change in the cities? 76% of them are saying yes, there'll be an impact. And then this graphic, you can kind of see the stock of how cities perceive, where the biggest impacts will be. And so maybe no surprise as well, but sort of that property and capital, infrastructure, and community and residential impact is ones that figure in highly. So the next piece of this, as I said, is then we took in the subset of our corporate data. So we're really, CDP is we're just at that tipping point where we're seeing the beginning of our ability to bring together these different data sets where we have the years of corporate data and being able to tease it together. So we're really excited to see, this is just like a first pass. But we are taking the subset of what it is 50 cities and where businesses had reported that they're facing risks. So across the 50 cities, 78 companies are reporting about 190 risks from climate change that they're seeing could affect their operations and their profits within the city. And so we broke it down to just kind of and I realize I'm probably talking like a New Yorker and very quickly, so I will try and slow down a little bit. But the alignment that in the subset, but the alignment of city and company risk, and just trying to better understand, what does this mean? How are companies seeing it, and how are cities seeing it? So you can kind of, in this representation, the alignment in identification of risks from temperature and heat waves is kind of the most and storms and floods sort of the most significance. There's just go. And then of course, you can see as well just where there's the gray space represents where it's not being recognized by a city. And then if I just go to this pie chart, this next question that we were looking at, which is where the risks are identified, sort of what is the variation in terms of the associated severity and timing. So maybe it's not a surprise that cities and companies are seeing the severity of risks sort of happening differently, and a lot of that to be true is based on the different functions and priorities. But there's not necessarily a lot of alignment here. So in terms of, we define timescales. We have sort of the CDP timescale as we have current and short-term and medium to long-term. But really in only 26% of cases does the relevant city expect the risk to take effect within the same time frame as business sees risks happening. But at the same time, we also have cities are seeing 75% when there is alignment in the most serious risks that cities are seeing, they line up with what companies are seeing. So there is a positive story in the sense that cities do see for extreme risk, they are aligned with what firms are seeing as well. And then the attempt with this last chart is really to just kind of better understand, where and ask this question: where a city is recognizing the same risk as a business. 96% of the time, the city is taking action. So, we're trying to kind of get to the question that begs of, where can there be more alignment and opportunity for risk identification, and where the action that's being taken by cities, is it covering the whole base of what a business is seeing if they're thinking about climate change. Overall, the ideas around, what are next steps is looking for more cooperation between cities and businesses to align their understanding and their response, to really, for cities to be able to facilitate and deliver adaptation actions that reduce risk for their communities and businesses, and that, goes without saying that just adapting to climate change is really critical to the success of cities and businesses. So the last part of the presentation is just to give an opportunity to say that you can go through and see the responses of all the cities that have reported to CDP publicly. You can go through this portal, which is on our website, and then you can also go through and download the data set and kind of understand and tease out and pull out different questions that you might have. So we've heard a variety of uses of why folks are going in terms of whether they're preparing on doing, comparative analysis for themselves, or they're also trying to kind of on the other end with data output and visual representations, and then of course it's just intelligence and research. But these are resources that are available in terms of what's coming in. So on our end, what our quote-unquote open data looks like right now is that you receive these raw files, and you can kind of, this is very, very early stages in Excel form, is what you have to find ways to think about, okay, we have all this information that's being reported, besides going through an annual cycle, an annual report to go identify and produce the analysis. What are some other opportunities to take this information and represent it in different ways? And then we would like to encourage researchers and others to use this as much as they're interested in. So that's it. So if there are more questions, the 2014 report, which I realize I sped through, and 2013, or just really anything about process, I would be happy to answer any more questions.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Katie. As a reminder, if you want to ask your question directly, please raise your hand on the webinar toolbar, and then I'll unmute your line so that you can ask directly. If you want to type in your question, you can use the questions box in there and type that in, and then I'll be able to ask Katie for you if your mic's not working or something. While you're thinking about your questions, I just had a couple of quick clarifying questions. The actions that were reported to address the impacts, there's a limit to the number of actions each city is taking per impact, or could a city list like 6 actions they're doing for extreme heat and that would show up as 6 on your list?
Yes. Sorry about that, yes. So in terms of the representation, let me just go back to that. So a city might be listing, yes, 7 or 8 actions around heat, and that would be represented in this graphic is what we were showing.
And
let's see, probably here.
So the 54 actions there are just showing that could be 2 cities doing 27 actions each, even though 80% of them are reporting. Like, have you looked at any of that kind of disparity or like level of effort, how it divides out by city?
Yes, that is definitely, so the answer to your question is yes, that there could be cities that are, kind of in aggregation reporting more risks and reporting more actions, and so in aggregate that's what we find. And that is sort of one of the drivers of what we're trying to do in terms of improving data quality as well. So to make sure that we're able to get, to the full scope of what cities are working on, that it's fully captured.
Right. Okay. So that makes sense. So 80% are reporting.
But in terms of yeah.
Go ahead.
So here, 80% are reporting that they're seeing temperature increase in heat waves, but it's not that there's 54 cities with those discrete actions that are being taken. Correct. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. We're going to go to the phone lines now. So Paul Fleming, I'm going to unmute your line so you can ask your question. Are you there, Paul?
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Sasha. And thank you, Katie. This is really great work that y'all are doing. So I'm Paul Fleming. I direct the Climate Resiliency Program for Seattle Public Utilities. And I had a comment and then a question. The comment has to do with the survey of cities. And not a criticism as much as I wonder if there's any way you can streamline the survey process, because I found, and I think some colleagues here have found, that it's pretty onerous completing the survey, and granted, it's it's an investment in time and it's an opportunity to get our story included in your survey results, but I found it to be really challenging to navigate and populate all the questions, and if there's any way to make that a little bit easier, I think it might help with a greater response. So that's the comment. On the question, again, this Protecting Our Capital report is really really interesting. I did share it with our Chamber of Commerce president here in Seattle, because I think the way you framed it is really interesting. I'm wondering to what degree you've addressed the geographic overlap or not of as you try and compare the city and corporate responses? Because you could have a corporate response that covers a certain geographical area that doesn't necessarily sync up with the geography covered by the city responses. And so I'm wondering if that's something that you've tackled or have thought about how to tackle.
Great, and thanks, Paul. I really appreciate it, and appreciate, and that goes without saying, which I did in the presentation, is really commending the efforts of all the cities that, are reporting through the CDP platform, and all the supporters and those that help the kind of the folks that we talk to, fill it out, because I know it really is a community village effort to do it. And so just thank you for that work, and your comment is well taken, and we're always looking for opportunities to improve the platform. So thank you. And really, I mean, I love this question. I love this challenge that you're saying, okay, well, what could the geographical overlap and scope be? And I think that, one of the, really this was the toe in for us. I think that we, so the question, in thinking about, well, how do we set boundaries, and really, making sure that both in the corporate disclosure, we are asking a question around, specifically these and for the company operations or their supply chain, and maybe those boundaries, in that question, it hasn't been clearly asked in the past, and now we're realizing that we're begging that we need, we need to input this. And the same on the city side is really further identifying what are the specific companies that maybe perhaps are key anchor institutions that they really rely on sort of for both their citizens for employment, and also residents and kind of lighting and really having the city identify that, so that we can see and sync up and understand where it links up with the corporate data. So where we are is now knowing that these are questions we need to ask in the disclosure process. So that's where we are with it.
Okay. And on the survey thing, I don't know if CDP has a process for soliciting feedback on the survey, but maybe there's a way to convene some sort of group to provide feedback on how to, maximize the information you're trying to gather and minimize the hurdles for the cities for getting there.
Yeah, great. I mean, and we go through it a consultation process sort of we're summer. I mean, we're in the process of identifying and writing our 2015 questionnaire. But you comment, Paul, and others. It's this is the webinar timing couldn't be greater, because it really, if there are ideas, we're very open to kind of getting input. So thank you.
Great, thanks.
Excellent. Great question, Paul. A couple questions coming in through the question window. Katie, do you know if when the CDP will launch the state and regional reporting efforts that you mentioned?
Yeah, so we just let's see. So we just we've just had 10 or 11 states and regions, none actually represented in the U.S. Unfortunately, it's a global effort, and even though there was invitations in the U.S., we didn't have any response there. But so we're going through a pilot in this next year, and it would be so the timing would be in the late 2015, 2016 cycle.
Okay, great. And that
there will be next, sorry, I was just going to say there'll be, as part of the Climate Week next week, there'll be a big kind of splash around states and regions reporting. So that'll be part of next week's announcements.
Oh, cool. Great. And that question was from Anna. We have a question from Ali. Does the CDP questionnaire differentiate between planned actions and actions already implemented or actions underway? Do you make a distinction there?
Yeah, so in terms, sorry, Sasha, was it just in mitigation or adaptation or
My
both?
guess is that it's probably related to adaptation, but Ali can clarify. Like if we're looking at these tree planting, is it enough to say, hey, we're going to plant 1 million trees, or is it we are planting 1 million trees, or we have already planted 1 million trees? Are those differentiated, or are those the same?
That is a fantastic question, which, again, it's this, this is great because it's input. So no, there isn't in the request, in the information request, there isn't it's what are you, the question is what are you, doing, or what actions do you have planned? And so to answer your question, it's the spread is fully there. And so, maybe there's an opportunity for us to look at the data and be more specific. It seems that there could be interest in doing that. But right now it's just what do you have and what's being planned.
Yeah, that's great. That's something I've seen a lot in the adaptation field as a whole, is this gap between, hey, we have a plan, and then actually taking it to implementation on the ground. And so kind of sorting out where we are in terms of planning versus action would be really useful. And Ali clarified that there's referring to mitigation as well. So is that true on the mitigation side? Greenhouse gas reduction?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's it's both. It's true on both sides. Yeah.
Okay. Great. And then the other part of that same question was, does the CDP score or evaluate the actions anyway, or is it's all self-reported data?
No, so it's all, it really is at this point in the maturity of where we are, and what we're asking is really just for the self-reported for data. And I know that there's different initiatives, and that, we do ask the question whether, your information is third-party verified, but, large stock of cities, no. But maybe over time that will develop.
Yeah, great. I had another question. It struck me, and when you were, that there's a lot of potential value in the comparison of what the corporations are doing, or the private sector entities, and how they perceive their risks with how the public sector or the local governments are looking at those same issues. But I was also surprised to see that for the drought, for example, it seemed like it was, unless I was reading the chart wrong, more corporations were viewing that as a risk than the communities where they're located. And I guess intuitively I would have thought it would have been the other way around, because drought seems like a slow onset sort of factor where the city would be worried about its water supply more than the company. Was I reading that correctly? And do you have any thoughts on why there's that discrepancy? Yeah, maybe slide 34.
Okay. Oh, so in terms of the like the act or the risk itself of drought is not as recognized by the city as it is by the company. I mean, why this could be happening, I don't know that I have an answer. I mean, the only thing too is that drought is one of those tricky things where is it happening now, or is it happening in the future? And that begs to the challenge too of like how these risk assessments are being conducted by cities and by companies, and sort of the time frame and that severity question is really different. I think the particular issue with drought, knowing that drought is sort of a long-term issue in sort of that sense of perception. So it could be maybe one reason this bubbled up is just how the risk assessments are conducted sort of by the different parties. But that's just a stab.
Right. Yeah. All right, folks on the line, please, if you have a last question for Katie, think about that. Either type it in or raise your hand and have a chance to ask it. I just had one more while you're thinking about that. What do you see from your perspective as the potential for furthering public-private partnerships along these lines, like uniting cities with the companies that are based there to address some of these concerns? If you kind of have this unique perspective of where there are those synergies, where both the company and the city identifies a risk and is taking action, how can we kind of build that bridge so that those actions are maybe greater than the sum of their parts?
Where could we further some of that public-private partnership?
Yeah, I guess I'm asking just from your personal perspective even, what are the opportunities for bringing together the public and private partnerships in a community, especially where they both recognize a shared risk and are developing actions to address it?
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of, at this point, it's what we hope to do and hope to tee up with this report, and again in the future, is we're like thinking about, in the CDP end, right, of developing and asking for disclosure. But I think it's so the CDP perspective in terms of using the data as a driver to find insights, and the data meaning the disclosure process. So, having that convening of opportunity, again, this is through a disclosure process where you're able to look across and identify where there's things lacking. But I think, kind of knowing that risk assessments for cities, there isn't sort of clarity in the space in terms of how to go about, there's not clarity. There's diversity in the different options for risk assessments, but I also know it's quite a heavy lift for cities in terms of being able to conduct them. So if there is an opportunity where there's several different corporate firms that are doing risk assessments, and for cities to be able to kind of piggyback and capitalize on this opportunity to diversify that with risks that they would see, more social risks that might not come up, and infrastructure questions that they have to ask. But our approach is having the disclosure and the data process lead, and then I would say different forums where you can bring that data as evidence and insights to then figure out what maybe more comprehensive risk frame could be used across both kind of the corporate and city side.
Okay, excellent. We have a couple more questions. One around how do you solicit input from cities? How did you grow from 111 to 207? I don't know if those are exactly the right numbers, between those 2 years. Where was the majority of the growth? And is it just a volunteer, cities just sign up and started adding information, or do you solicit and do you track, response rates?
Sure. Sorry again for losing you for a second. So how did we go from 110 to 200, and where are we seeing the biggest growth?
Yes, that's great.
Okay, great. Okay. So one great opportunity that came through is, we in the last year with or last 2 years really, with a partnership with C40, and also support to hire. I joining the team and having a person in the U.S. as a regional director and being able to grow our support in U.S. and Canada, and I have a colleague in Latin America who's physically in Sao Paulo in Brazil, and we have a team in London. So the support really to provide and build connections. So I would say, because of the human capital and investment that CDP has been able to make regionally, we are scaling up and seeing a lot. I would say Latin America, in particular, in Brazil, in particular, there's rapid expansion there. But we're also planning on bringing on a team member in Asia, and also expand growth there. But there's quite a lot happening right now. I have the lens that I'm in New York City and seeing different things happening, and particularly with the UN summit next week, I think there's a strong need and desire also among cities that different groups are sort of coalescing around supporting and better understanding how we can kind of unify a little bit in terms of the reporting and disclosure and sort of delivery. So I would say across the board with CDP, partnerships is really something that we're trying to work on even further, and so the C40 is a great representation of that, but really trying to maximize our value, and then as I said, sort of this focus of this report with the corporate data, but then leveraging all these great ties that we have with firms that are operating, global 400, 500 largest firms are reporting through CDP. So really thinking about scale as well in the next couple of years as our company support, but really then identifying where cities then would also be interested in participating.
Excellent. So yeah, the strength in the partnerships for helping to extend your reach and bring more people to the fold, as well as having the manpower, woman power in order to do it.
Yes.
All right. Well, excellent. There were a couple of questions about the slides. Are these graphics from the report that you're showing? Or are you willing to share the slides in addition to the webinar on ASAP?
Oh yeah, you can include. Sorry, you're asking where you can find them?
Yeah, there were a couple questions if the slides themselves would be made available in addition to the webinar, or if there's places where you could find those graphics.
Oh, yes. Yes. So the graphics that I included in the presentation are from 13 Healthier, Wealthier Cities Report and the 2014 Protecting Our Capital. Those are the ones at the end. But in terms of the slides from this presentation, I mean, if there's a place that ASAP would like to house them, that would be great. And then when we have a copy of the webinar, we can post both the slide deck and the webinar on our site as well, on the city's page.
Okay, excellent. All right, with that, Katie, I want to say thank you very much for sharing this information with us and providing a conduit for discussion and improvement and really focusing on that collaboration. That's great. I'll extend the offer again for anybody